record locally?
Nah, we don't do any of that fancy stuff. So, Blue Snowball recording directly from Zoom. It is fucking rank over here. Audio nightmare over here.
My wonderful internet connection. I should sound fine.
It's good, but I'm good at audio because I have one headphone off of my ear instead. That's the real way to do it. Mm-hmm. Folks, that voice you hear on the other end is Internet Hall of Famer Shannon Strucci. You know her work from Parasocial Hell, Scanline, and also what I'm talking to her about today, Inside Out, your body horror tabletop RPG magazine, and also we're going to talk about body horror in general. Shannon, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I love body horror so much. And I want to sort of get into, I've been trying to investigate why it gets deep into my soul or the core of my very being. And I've come up with a few answers, but I'm sort of interested in what you have to say, because you're a very prominent person in the body horror community.
Oh, that's good to hear. I think that for me, like, this is super personal, but like when I was 5 or 6, I had like a tumor in my hand. And I had had psoriasis, and I had fingernail problems where they would like lift off the nail bed. Mm-hmm. It was like awful. I had like it wasn't anything like serious medical issues, but I dealt from a young age like with weird things. I mean, everyone's like a lot of media like explores puberty or whatever. It's like there's weird stuff happening in my body, but like in a non-sexual at all or like normal way, I had weird things happening with my body. So I relate, and you're like scared and confused, and like other kids think it's gross and don't understand it.
Yeah,
so for me, like disfigurement and those sorts of changes and like the repercussions of the changes, like I have nerve damage and stuff in my hand. Not bad though. I think that's what got me initially interested in it. And I grew up, my mom was a big horror fan and got me into like Evil Dead, like Evil Dead 2, where his hand is taken over and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think just the idea of loss of control of your own body is so terrifying, and being reminded that like you're just like meat. And like atoms and the depersonalization of that, I think, is like terrifying, but it's also fun. It's not too like, there's some horror that's it's not as serious or political as a lot of other horror, so maybe it's easier for people to have fun with it. So that's
inherently more personal. I think there's also corollary, because there's like one side of body horror where it's you're decaying or you're putrefying, but there's another side of it where you sort of become gross, but then your ascended form is more powerful, and you're like more uninhibited as well, because, you have sort of transcended beyond human limits. In every Resident Evil, there's a character like, I must go beyond my human.
Yeah, 100%. And that's kind of like a fun fantasy, right? Like, well, if I, all I have to do is sacrifice being human, I can beat everybody up.
Yeah. So I think it's that, I was trying to trace it back to something, and you know what actually got me thinking about it? Just thinking about the child's garden of body horror that I had access to in the early 90s. Because for some reason I had seen like a screenshot of Street Sharks, and then I was just reminded of Street Sharks. And I was watching the first episode, and it's like, they get injected with a horrible serum. They have a horrific transformation sequence. And they're going, look, in the 90s, there were infinite cartoons of people getting injected with stuff or falling into vats and then going like...
The reanimator goo. It's always the glowing green.
Yeah. And I think what started that, if I could trace it back to anything, I think it might be The Toxic Avenger, which is definitely not a movie for kids, but has that weird sort of cartoonish bubblegum aesthetic. And, it was eventually a cartoon, which is fucking weird when you think about it. But yeah, that sort of started this arms race, because in Spider-Man, there was body horror. In Batman, like the pilot episode is body horror, with Man-Bat going through it. And it's that same thing of losing control of your body, but also gaining new power as well. That sort of like, and no other horror, even as like a kid, no other horror got to me that way. Like slashers were less scary to me. It's because what's the end? You're dead. But now you have to live on as some sort of creature. That's much more of like a weird horror situation for me, or some sort of cosmic punishment, or maybe divine deliverance sometimes.
I really like Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Yes,
and that there's weird the the lady who lives in the vacuum who has like suction cup hands, and there's like
Mm-hmm.
infinite weird grotesque a lot of it's not body horror, it's other types of horror, but there is a
Mm-hmm.
lot of uh their bodies getting deformed or changed or whatever. It used to turns
Mm-hmm.
into a Bigfoot or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, anyway, that was probably my touchstone at that age too for it when I was
Mm-hmm.
really young. I would love that show even though it scared me.
I think if I were to, it seems like there were more like pop culture awareness, like pop environmentalism in the early 90s, like
Oh yeah.
Captain Planet and Fern Gully. I think because like conservatives weren't concerned about that movement, so they just were like, weren't combating it in any way. And there was
Mm-hmm.
like more freedom to sort of express these environmental things in like a pop sentiment. And I think that's sort of where a lot of it comes from because it's usually someone going to some chemical factory on the other side of
Mm-hmm.
town and then falling into a vat and then or some sort of like horrible medical thing happening like this sort of marriage of the capitalist waste of the earth is reflected in your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of that in the 90s that I think is just completely gone from.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I watch a lot of kids' TV, but I can't think of anything. And I guess it was something easy to lean on to that parents would, I guess, like our liberal parents would approve of. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, the bad guy's he cuts down trees or whatever. It's pretty kind of lazy too
Mm-hmm.
to like keep falling back on. I remember watching a lot of that as a kid as well.
Yeah, but we don't have tree cutting bad guys anymore. Where are the tree cutting bad guys?
I never saw the Lorax. Did the Onceler cut down trees? I just know the
I
Onceler was popular on Tumblr.
Yeah, they got everyone was really hot for the
Or the
Onceler for
Onceler,
some reason.
yeah. That's the last thing I or like well yeah, it's not for kids, but like Okja or something. It's just not. I think everyone is so just like terrified of climate change at this point, and it's kind of like I don't want to say losing battle, but an individual consumer like recycle is not going to fix it. I think
Mm-hmm.
everyone knows that people are less naive about it, I guess.
Yeah, it's almost like too scary to think about. So
Mm-hmm.
we because that is a big thing. Huge environment. All of these environmental factors are still wreaking havoc with all of our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Microplastics and frickin' everything. And I wonder why there isn't as much attention paid to it now when it seems just as relevant, if not more relevant. Was it because of like a campaign by conservative interests, or like was it? I wonder why in an era that's even more defined by our relationship with how we're affecting our physical forms through our
Mm-hmm.
pollution. Why aren't we calling attention more to this?
I don't know. I'm sure there are like weird structural reasons. Like maybe there was some kind of like grant or something, or some government body paid for, environmentalist propaganda and cartoons, or there were
Mm-hmm.
just like there were people who like wanted to push that, and then it's just not. The money ran out, or they shifted focus to something else. I have no idea.
Yeah.
That's not really my. I'm sure there's some weird convoluted reason that there was so much of it at that time period.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe just the focus has shifted more to like racial justice and in like the adult mind of like what are the big problems facing our society now,
Yeah.
or like gender equality versus like it's all still happening.
Yeah.
It's worse. You could feel it. It's so hot. I live in Georgia. It's
Oh
hot
wow.
outside all the time now. So it already was, but like it's hot. You can wear shorts on Christmas and it's weird. It's like even people in denial of it. I don't know.
Yeah. I think also just because I guess the focus really has shifted to technology as the source of horror as well.
Mm-hmm.
Although maybe I'm just extrapolating from Black Mirror, uh, which is I saw. Did you see any of the new Black Mirror episodes?
I have not. I have Bandersnatch was my last Black
Yeah,
Mirror experience like 5 years ago or whenever. I
yeah,
liked it. I think there was like a weird backlash against Black Mirror eventually from people who are just haters. I don't know. I always liked it. All right.
yeah. I think it's pretty good. But it's funny because in this new season, there's a couple of episodes that just aren't technology at all.
Mm.
They've just abandoned the premise because I imagine Charlie Brooker is like, there's only so many ways to come up with, oh no, my phone, you know,
Yeah.
you know. Eventually, you start having to, and actually, this season had an episode about social and racial justice issues. That was
Mm-hmm.
the last episode of the season is sort of about that, which is I think um the thing that's on people's minds now, maybe
Mm-hmm.
more than sort of a pop understanding of environmental change.
I mean, obviously, it's all interconnected. You know, we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
get climate refugees, and it's gonna make housing harder, and and that's gonna disproportionately affect people of color. But it's like hard to, I guess, keep people's focus on all of it,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it's really hard to enact any kind of meaningful structural change.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. These are like big questions
Well,
about
that
stuff.
we're going to answer right
Yeah, which
now.
I'm not. I'm an idiot. Like I don't. I know how to edit videos and talk about spooky movies. Like I don't know, but it's always interesting how that's like reflected in pop culture and horror, especially like everyone. Like if you've studied horror at all, you know it's like a major barometer for what's going on culturally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is always interesting. Like
Yeah.
with the ad, like when there was like Vietnam War footage on TV, that's when a lot of American horror movies got like more gory, and then like all the torture stuff after like 9/11 and the war
Yeah.
in Iraq. So
Gore is sort of making a comeback as the big horror
mm-hmm.
model now. Terrifier 2 and the recent Evil Dead, which I don't know how much it grossed, but I saw it and it was pretty good. It was very, very gory.
I'm like such a massive fan of the original Evil Dead movies. Like I
Yeah.
read Bruce Campbell's autobiography in high school, and it was like a big like I was like a big I
If
don't know. I
chins
watched
could
the movie.
kill.
Yeah, if Chins Could Kill, Confessions of a B movie actor. I read it like twice. I don't. It's really hard for me to separate that if I'm watching. I haven't seen Ash versus Evil Dead, which I think I would like. But it would be hard for me to watch the new movie and not be like, well, this isn't what I want it to be, which isn't really fair. I watched the one that was like 2013, and I didn't really care for it.
Yeah,
I
the
got why
Fede
people liked
Alvarez
it, but
one.
it was like, I should watch the new one though. But it's hard for me to not be biased.
The new one looks really good. That's the thing that everyone's saying about it, and it's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good looking. All the set pieces are great, really good practical effects. But like the Fede Alvarez one, it is not funny. It is
Yeah.
not there's. It preserves none of the comedy of the original, which is all right. I like the horror premise of Evil Dead, where it's Dybbuk's, right? It's some evil spirit has taken control of someone you love,
Mm-hmm.
and just dealing with that is a fucking nightmare. It's like,
It's
yeah,
horrifying.
yeah.
Conceptually, it's fucking horrifying.
I mean, that's also like body horror too. Like you said, you
Mm-hmm.
related it back to the Evil Dead movies because something has taken over your body, and you're fighting against it as well. I think it's interesting that you linked it back to a childhood experience with cancer because I think
Mm-hmm. No, it
I had a
wasn't cancer.
lot
Say
of
it
it.
wasn't cancer. It's
Oh,
benign tumor. It was still a
a
tumor though.
different
Yeah,
tumor, yeah.
yeah.
But
Still a tumor. It's very much
yeah.
still a tumor. But yeah.
But yeah, when I was a kid, I had formative experiences with diseases. Nothing that happened to me,
Mm-hmm.
but my mom had cancer. She
Mm.
survived. But I when I was 11, there was this person who I knew. My mom was friends with this person who I kept visiting in the hospital who had cancer, and she passed away from it. But it's weird seeing someone your own age deteriorate and get worse. That I'm sure that has something to do with my interest in disease, or sort of my titillation is the wrong word, but it kind
Yeah.
of is. It is the right
Mm-hmm.
word. It's like it produces these little finger pricks of sort of sensation, but also disgust as well. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a sort of want to explore that feeling, to understand it, so that it doesn't have such power over me as well.
And it's so taboo culturally. I
Yeah.
mean, also I come from a place like when I was in like middle school, like a bunch of my family died, including my dad, and it was like really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of changed, like compared to another like white American person, so much experience with death, I think totally changed my relationship with it. And like one of my family members became a mortician, and I used to live with her, and she'd just like come home and talk about horrible dead body stuff all the
Okay.
time. And
Yeah.
it's but that's normal for us too. Like you grow up around it, it's less taboo. It's not that it's less scary, but maybe you're a little less squeamish or more
Mm-hmm.
open to, or curious, or like you want to engage with it. Like it's not, well, some of it's body horror, but like Silent Hill 2 is like my favorite game of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a lot of my fixation on that has to do with my own experiences with death and so on, that like it might be a little weirder for someone who hadn't experienced that, or who
Mm-hmm.
didn't grow up with a parent who's like obsessed with horror like my mom was.
Yeah, yeah. My dad was the one who was obsessed with horror, but he was much more of a zombie movie guy.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really. I remember. I think one of my first formative experiences with body horror, which is a very Canadian experience too, which is oh, David Cronenberg's The Fly. I'm 8 years
Mm-hmm.
old and I see this videotape. What's this all about?
Oh
And
no,
then it's
that's
oh
way too
yeah, it's
young.
way too
That's
young to watch
horrible.
The Fly. But I think that also had a lot to do with because I watched that movie recently. Just the tightest script, incredibly tight script, and you have Jeff Goldblum who's like instantly likable. So when you see him, becoming a cancerous fly man, uh, it really gets to you. It really gets in your heart. And poor Gina Davis, she's wailing. And the freaking scene with the maggot birth. Oh my god, terrible.
His finger, the part where his fingers are all gross.
Oh yeah, no good.
I've always had like a disgust reaction and a fear towards pregnancy. And watching The Brood. It's where she's like eating this. So it's like, ugh! It's so gross, but it's like, oh, I'm glad that this thing that people act like is very like, and I understand why it's like holy and beautiful for people who like want to have kids, and it's wonderful for them. But like to me, it's like the parasitic nightmare shit.
Yeah. There's a thing that's growing inside of you, and it's leaching your nutrients. Yeah.
And it's like weird, and your body's changing in ways that you can't. And I'm sure people like in the past, if they didn't medically understand what was happening to them, that's so scary. And Cronenberg taps into that so well.
Oh, you have a glow, just like in body horror. You're glowing like a radioactive monster. That's definitely I mean Cronenberg, we're gonna get to him eventually in this conversation because he's is he the most well-known body horror guy? I guess his name is synonymous with it.
I think so too. I was going back over for the zine that I did. I wrote a little introduction and I was pulling from Philip Brody's piece that I think like named body horror called Horality, the Textuality of the Contemporary Horror Film, and he talks a bunch about Cronenberg and American Werewolf in London and Alien and The Thing and Deep Red, which are all like roughly contemporary, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, American Werewolf in London, one of the greatest body horror sequences of all time.
Oh yeah, I love that movie. I've seen that so many times.
Terrible man directed it, but he could direct way better than his son,
Yeah. Oh my god.
And that was before he did The Terrible Thing. So it's okay.
Oh,
it's okay to like it.
It's okay. Well, it's like I guess just an instance of separating the art from the artist. I wasn't even thinking about that he had directed it. I'm just like, that's probably another one my mom showed me. And I love Griffin Dunn. I just rewatched After Hours for a different
he's
podcast,
great, yeah.
Which also has like, he's so terrified of burns and getting burned, and he's like that's also like a weird, not graphic body horror, but that's an element of that movie too for like a dark comedy that's not like a over the top horror film.
Yeah, I always forget about Griffin Dunn's horrible decay makeup in that movie.
Yeah, with the little dangly piece on his neck. I think I watched an interview where he was mad that's all he was giving this great performance, but everyone just kept looking at the like disgusting like gore latex on his neck. Yeah, the animatronics and the makeup on that are so good because by the end he's like so decayed it's not even Griffin Dunn anymore.
Yeah, it's funny that what about that early time? I guess the 70s and 80s is when it first really starts humming. Can you think of like body horror examples from like the 50s and 60s besides like werewolves? I guess is the earliest example I can probably think of.
There was probably some like sci-fi stuff. I'm not as up on like 50s because a lot of them are so slow. Like it's just like stuff was cut differently then. 50s and 60s sci-fi movies. There's probably like some fear of radiation. And I'm sure a lot of like post-war Japan stuff dealing with atomic horror.
Yes.
But I maybe because like speaking of American movies, maybe there was like enough censorship or they were kind of worried about what they could show. It's like, well, we'll just put a giant ant in the movie instead of like anything graphic. That's not my. I know a lot more about 70s, 80s movies.
Yeah. I'm thinking.
Sure.
Do you remember that one? There's one that always terrified me. It's like this B movie. I think I first saw it on MST3K or something like that. It's The Melting Man or like The Incredible Melting Man, which is the 70s body horror movie, which is like very slow, but the sequences of him melting, they get to you. I tell you that much. They get to you. They did the melt part right.
Remember, I think it's Abominable Dr. Phibes, one of the Phibes movies where like he melts a girl's face. And I remember it like fucked me up. It was like really disturbing to me.
That's
like 70s, I guess. Like those weird, some more campy movies that will just suddenly have a scene that's just like terrifying. Or like in the Deep Red is one of the ones mentioned in that article, and it's like the killer boils this person alive. It's really crap. It's a great movie, but it's so graphic and like, oh my god.
the face melting thing reminds me of maybe one of, I think, a lot of people's earliest exposure to it, and something you wouldn't think of as being like a father of body horror, but Steven Spielberg and Raiders of the Lost Ark. I
Mm-hmm.
remember like watching that movie very young because it's indie. You show that to your kids, right? It's
Yeah.
fine to show even the horrible things happen in those movies, especially the fucking Nazi face melting scene,
Mm-hmm.
which I saw way too young, but was still interested in it and would rewind and watch it again because just to see like after you get used to the idea of like, oh, it's just an effect, then it
Mm-hmm.
becomes cool to see how they did it as well, which is something
Yeah.
I
It's a
learned
really
pretty early
impressive.
about movies.
And that is something I would like. Not that I watch that many like PG-13 big release movies now, but I do think there's more of a reticence to do shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know, to have a really disturbing practical effect scene of someone's face melting
Mm-hmm.
in like a Marvel movie or something. I don't know if that would. But it's also good to not traumatize children, I guess.
Yeah,
It's
they
like
were
weird. It's hard to
traumatized.
draw that line. I'm sure it's hard for parents of like what their kids should be able to watch and expose them to new things and let them learn, but not just traumatize them forever. Like my friend saw The Exorcist when he was like 5.
That's too
It's
young.
fine as an adult. Yeah, it's not gonna
Yeah,
give me nightmares, but it was like, yeah, that's not a good idea.
it's weird. The stuff that would give me nightmares as a kid wasn't horror stuff. It was always like weird dramas. There was this one movie called Fluke. I don't know if you know of this movie. It's this weird '90s movie where Matthew Modine is killed and he comes back to life as like a dog, and
It's really
he's
weird.
guiding his son's life. And it's a very weird. But this movie gave me nightmares as a kid,
Mm.
and like I had nightmares about like Mister Rogers and stuff like that. Mister
Wow.
Rogers luring me into his house. It was like whenever I would see something that was way too above my grade. Like I saw Clockwork Orange when I was way too young, but I didn't know like any of the bad stuff was
You,
happening in it because I had just
yeah,
no
you probably
frame
don't
of reference
understand
for
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the stuff that I could understand, I was more susceptible to nightmares. But also, I think you should traumatize your kids a little,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's whole freaking Twitter accounts dedicated to children's horror, and this
Mm-hmm.
scarred me when I was a kid. But you revisit it later because it's also sort of like amusing or nostalgic or weirdly comforting in a way as well to revisit the pieces of media that left a strong, perhaps negative impression on you at a very young age.
And then there's a difference too. Like I had a friend in elementary school who had like a weird family life, and she had moved to a new place, and I was there alone late at night because I can't sleep. And they had Night of the Comet on TV, and it just like something about it when I was like 9 terrified me. Like it
Mm-hmm.
really, I think it was the situation with like her parents fighting or me being alone in this weird house. And that was like a bad experience. And I never have revisited that. But then other stuff like watching Are You Afraid of the Dark, reading Goosebumps, playing horror games is much
Mm-hmm.
more positive because it was scary, but it's like as I'm growing up, I'm exposing myself to scarier things and it's fun and it's exciting and I feel more grown up
Mm-hmm.
because I was so into horror stuff, especially compared to other kids my age. I was 100% positive, even if in the moment it's like really scary. It's like I always loved haunted house attractions. I've been like
Mm-hmm.
really when I was like 14, I was like leading the group, even if it was like male strangers were with me because I was like so into it, again, versus something that was actually like upsetting and like traumatic to where I never wanted to rewatch that movie. I probably could now in my 30s, but for a long time I was like, no, thank you.
Yeah, you've hit an interesting part of like not just body horror, but horror in general, which is that it's sort of like spicy foods,
Yeah,
You
yeah, you have to acclimate
slowly
yourself.
develop a tolerance and then you get used to it. And there's sort of like that's a fun process too of like testing
Mm-hmm.
yourself of, okay, what's my limit here? What can I do? What won't I do?
Mm-hmm.
what is unacceptable or too gory to me? And it's heartening to actually see the Evil Dead movie, and it still does stuff in it where I'm like, oh no, oh god,
Yeah.
yeah. It's very nice that I'm not jaded enough where I can still think someone chews glass in the movie, which is a spoiler. But
Mm-hmm.
see, you winced there a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, it's no good.
Well, it's so good. I love spicy food, and there's such a difference between something that is like, oh, I'm trying something from a new culture, and it has this unique blend of flavors, and it's like sour and hot and this and that, versus like the novelty hot sauces that are just capsaicin,
Mm-hmm.
like that are just like, oh, I'm just chemically burning myself. What is this? Like there are horror films that I think are I'm not someone who's going to moralize about horror, but it's like, oh, this is just for shock. And there's nothing
Yeah.
really like, I don't like a lot of people like him. I don't like Eli Roth's films.
Yeah,
For
they're
me, I've never
really
gotten any. They're just mean.
I think it's very funny. The Green Inferno is one of the few right-wing horror movies
Mm,
that one of the few, like, I should say, competently made, in that it's
mm,
like not like, I imagine a right-wing horror movie is made by like the Daily Wire production company, and it has
yeah.
like audio problems, and there's like a boom mic and a bunch of shots and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But I guess there are other examples of like right wing horror, but like Bone Tomahawk, you could argue, is a right wing horror. It's made by a right wing guy. I don't know if you could read that much conservative messaging into it.
I mean, the whole like, there's a lot of horror studies material covering like slashers being anti-sex, or
Mm-hmm.
like it also depends on what you mean by conservative. If you're meaning like really hardline, like racist,
Mm-hmm.
transphobic, or more just like teenagers shouldn't be doing drugs, like that's kind of different to
Mm-hmm.
me. They're both conservative and both like reactionary. Um, but I think there's a lot of it in a long history of it. Maybe less so now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I haven't seen Bone Tomahawk, but that seems like almost like a novelty for a horror movie to be like that,
Mm-hmm.
like overtly conservative, because most of them are more like transgressive. Even if they're
Yeah.
not progressive, they're like pushing. They want to
Yeah.
push boundaries, you know.
Yeah, Bone Tomahawk, it's hard to read hard conservatism into it, even though
Mm-hmm.
S. Craig Zoller is definitely, has his political points of view.
Mm-hmm.
Much easier to read and dragged across concrete. It's very okay. I see the messaging of this. Um, but yeah, the thing with body horror. So, what are your foundational body horror works in your body horror canon, or like, what are some of the works that influenced you today?
I mean, I love Cronenberg stuff. I saw my friend was in a film class in college and they were watching Videodrome. Like it was a VHS tape the professor was projecting. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
first time I ever saw Videodrome. It's really
Mm-hmm.
cool. Like they let me just come in and watch it even though I wasn't in the class. I love all of his work. I love the way he talks about Videodrome too, how he was like watching stuff late at night that he wasn't supposed to be watching, and like the
Yeah.
static on the TV, and that's where he got the idea for it. I love
Yeah,
Evil
that's a
Dead.
lot of Toronto history in Videodrome, because I think it's
Yeah,
partially
yeah.
inspired by Moses Znaimer, who is a guy who made this Toronto channel called City TV, which
Mm-hmm.
aired, racy stuff. It aired
Late
like
at
the Red
night,
Shoe Diaries and stuff. But
which
that
is kind
that
of
was
like
later.
naive now with the internet. You could be a little toddler on an iPad and accidentally watch like creepy pregnant Elsa videos. Like
Yeah.
there's so much more exposure to hardcore stuff for kids now,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. And I read a ton of short horror stories when I was very young.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of like the horror at Chilton Castle. I'm blanking on it a little bit now, but I just like I didn't read horror novels, but I would get like every single one at the library, these like books of like probably like mid 1800s to mid 1900s short horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I said, I loved Evil Dead, American Werewolf in London. Much more recently, there's a Korean webcomic called Sweet Home that I
Oh,
was obsessed with.
I've seen that's on Netflix. They have a show on Netflix about it. But what's the comic about?
It's so good. It's this Korean guy who's basically like the Korean equivalent of like a 4chan, like incel troll.
Yeah.
Horrible person. He's like suicidal, self-harms, and he's like alone in this apartment. He doesn't really have anybody. And then like the apartment starts being taken over by monsters, but the monsters used to be people and they're taken over kind of by like their repressed desires
Mm-hmm.
or their like issue. It's sort of like persona stuff, like the
Mm-hmm.
Lacanian mirror self. So like if someone felt like they were really weak or they were like obsessed with fitness, it's like this giant monster that says protein and eats people. And the art's really good. It's really funny and the characters are very, very well done. And it's kind of like Wreck, where they're all stuck in the apartment. And it's like this guy who's a horrible troll, internet troll, slowly learns how to be a person as everyone around him is dying. And you have like like I said, there's like this girl who plays guitar who has her own like traumatic past, and there's like a Christian Korean guy who's like really religious, and they're how they all interact with each other. And like I said, the monster designs. There's one that's like a giant torso, like a deformed, shriveled head with like a beautiful face on it that
Mm-hmm.
always wants like attention and affirmation. It's like about how beautiful it is, or else it'll kill you and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. It's just I watched the adaptation and I thought the first half was really really good, and then it kind of went off the rails and like diverged from the plot a lot. But and there's also a really good comic called Feast for a King. That's kind of like a queer erotic horror sci-fi thing about space worms eating each other. It's
Okay.
really good, really interesting. I think sort of more obscure stuff like that. Like a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of old movies and stories, and then video games and web comics is what I'm more interested in now. I don't see
I
it. I
see.
see. I try to see like big horror movies, like I saw *Malignant* and *Barbarian* and *Skinamarink* and stuff, but
Yeah.
I don't catch it. I don't keep up with horror film as much as I should, I think.
I think it's interesting. You mentioned Barbarian as well, or even Malignant. How much comedy and horror is sort of
Mm-hmm.
like. I'm glad that's become sort of a mainstream thing. Even like Terrifier 2. I guess not. It's funny that Evil Dead is one of the few horror movies that don't have comedy injected to it into it
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. But I think it's from Jordan Peele. Obviously, is a huge reason for why more comedy guys are attempting horror. But I think
Mm-hmm.
there's something about it where comedy people are able to do naturalistic dialogue usually better than a lot of horror writers, or they have training
Yes.
in like developing characters so that they're likable and so that you care if something happens to them, you care if they live or die, which you only have so much time to do in like an hour and a half movie. But
Absolutely.
Zach Krager, who directed Barbarian,
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I like the movie.
I like the movie too. But yeah, you care about those characters.
Mm-hmm.
And then even though Justin Long is a terrible person in the movie, he's also like a complete human as well.
Mm-hmm.
He's not just like a stock terrible person. You understand his motivations and his sensitivity, even though he's like a fuck, which makes
Mm-hmm.
him, even though he's terrible, it's still difficult to watch him struggle against this inevitable fate that's about to befall him.
Horrible, weird,
Yeah.
gross fate. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
was always, it's not really body horror, but I was always a big fan of Scream too,
Oh
which is like
yeah.
very, very hysterical movie. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, I mean, I do love like more serious horror movies about like grief and whatever, like Hereditary and all this other stuff. But my favorite stuff is usually comedy horror that doesn't take itself too seriously. Because I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
obviously this is something people have talked about a lot too. But the way that you can oscillate back and forth, you have some gags, get your guard down, then you're terrified, then it's funny again. I
Yeah.
think that's a more complete experience than just something where
Uh,
it's like, well, though that was kind of scary.
it can also make the horror gut punch so much more cruel.
Mm-hmm.
Like the example I would use is Drag Me to Hell, where it's like
Yeah.
it's pretty goofy from the tone of the movie. You wouldn't expect it to end like it does, and then it ends
Mm-hmm.
like it does, and you're oh my god, another movie with Justin Long in it for some reason.
Mm.
Another,
That
and
was
he's good
when
in the movie too. He's good at eliciting sympathy.
I saw that in theaters with my cousin and my brother, and we were like the only people laughing, which sucked. It's like people didn't understand that I was, which fine, whatever. Like not everyone is like a big, Sam Raimi nerd. Same thing when I saw not a horror movie, but what's the more recent Tarantino movie
Once Upon a Time in
in
Hollywood.
Hollywood? Yeah, no one was laughing at that except
No
for
one was
like
laughing
me.
at the scene where they waste the Manson kids.
Yeah, or like with the dog food with bats in it. I don't know. Sometimes like I guess it's got to be hard being trying to do horror comedy and stuff when the audience is like, am I supposed? They don't understand if they're supposed to be
Yeah.
laughing or not.
Well, yeah, you sort of have to. I don't know if I'm like a media literacy is dead person
Mm.
because I don't know if it's that media literacy is dead or just that people have always had this level of media literacy. They just now have a platform to voice their opinions now.
Well, they're incentivized to grandstand about it
Mm-hmm.
and to for attention online, and it would normally just be like a person, like a normie person who doesn't care. And now they're
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I have to take a stand against this, and what they're saying is just like nonsense.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just Twitter is such a poison on
Yes.
any of that. It's so bad now. Especially you give like a 17-year-old incentive to think that they know everything about art. It's really unfortunate.
Man, I really am glad I did not have Twitter when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
I because there's stuff out there floating on the internet that someone should make that should be a body horror thing where you have to become physically every cringe thing you did on the internet as a teenager.
I would literally die.
Yeah.
I would die.
Yeah.
I would just like, yeah.
I would be like the Fly, I would point the shotgun at my head.
Yeah, none of this, no more of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. My stuff is on forums that are all gone now. So I don't, yeah, all the cringe stuff.
Yeah, all the dead links out there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I wish that was I guess the new guard of horror, which is being led by Brandon Cronenberg, or he has some. Did you see Possessor or what's
I
the new one?
wanted
Infinity
to.
Pool.
I want to see both of them just to keep up with stuff, but I haven't seen them.
Yeah, they're all right. It's also they're his first two films. Like
Mm-hmm.
his dad's first two movies weren't like the best ones on earth.
Is Shivers his first? What was Cronenberg's
I think there
first?
was one before that. There was a weird, but Shivers and Rabid, I think, are the two
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh first Cronenberg. And I don't know if you've seen Shivers. It's
I have
weird 70s sex stuff.
pre-AIDS somehow.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting, like, cultural historical movie about like a STD monster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not his best, but it is interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I should have mentioned too when you were asked, we're talking about the internet and you were asking me about influences. I was really big into creepypasta culture around
Yeah.
2010 and
Creepy
like Marble
pasta. Yeah.
Hornets, and I wrote a creepypasta and was on the forums and stuff before. This woman ran like the big creepypasta forums around 2009, 2010, and then Xboard 4chan people doxed her and like threatened her, so she
No, no.
quit. Great, cool people, cool stuff.
Oh no. How
But
can
yeah,
you
that
get
that
that
was cool.
dramatic over like you are in a room that is called the zone of the ender room. He is pointing towards a plate. The plate is empty. It's all
Yeah,
runs together at the same point.
yeah. And a lot of it was very derivative, but it's interesting to watch how mainstream horror culture has just stolen from it.
Mm-hmm.
100% just like taken from that, and how now it's evolved into like all the back rooms and SCP stuff, which
Yeah.
I'm not 18 anymore, so I don't keep up with it. But it's cool. That stuff is cool.
Yeah. I like the back rooms, and like I guess part of our technology horror obsession too comes from that. You're
Mhm.
you're posting online, so you're gonna do horror stories that vaguely relate to online. But I a lot of the creepy pastas were about lost media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Candle
This
Cove was a good one. All the
Yeah,
band
and it
drop.
got
Yeah.
made into Channel Zero. They keep
Hmm.
making those. And I saw that, and it was okay. Did not need to be 10 episodes long.
Yeah, they were good because they were short.
Yeah.
You get in, something spooky happens at the end, and then you're out.
Yeah.
That was like the majority of creepypastas. But yeah, a lot of the lost media stuff, which again I think mainstream media years later is trying to like capitalize on a little more, or
Yeah.
turn into something more profitable. And it's interesting how that lag happens
Mm-hmm.
for having been like on the edge of that for a year or two a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's cool though. There's a lot of really good body horror and old creepypastas.
Oh yeah. What is a good body? You turn me on to some good body horror creepypastas if you can recall some of them.
What was it? There was one. I think the guy or the person who wrote it went by the username Orange Soda, but people thought it was called Russian Experiment Orange Soda.
Okay. Oh,
Um,
is it the Russian sleep experiment?
yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
that
know
one
that.
where
That's
they're
a
like
famous one. I
doing.
love that one. That's great. And it has like the picture of the a distended looking guy who's just it turned out to be a Halloween decoration that would had a spooky filter on it. But
Yeah,
it was
or
really
like
effective at the time. Yeah.
it's not as much body horror, but I really like The Rake and Candle Cove and a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of other ones that I probably wouldn't. But yeah, that one I remember freaking me out.
No, the
And I was
Russian
like,
sleep
wow.
experiment is really good. It's legendary for a reason.
Hmm.
If you haven't read it, the idea is it's like also a lost media piece. A journal has been found with the
Hmm.
Russian, and they did this experiment where people stayed up, and as they stayed up longer and longer, weirder stuff started to happen. They started changing, and
Yeah.
all that good stuff happens there. Um, yeah, I was thinking about how you say short stories and how you're consumed a lot of horror short stories, and I think actually like horror is really good for short story format. Also, why I think comedy people are sort of well suited for horror is because like a good horror story sometimes, not all the time, but a lot of the time it resembles a joke where it's set up, set up, set up, set up, and oh, there's the thing at the end.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of Junji Ito shorts are as well.
Yeah,
It's like set up, set
they
up,
can
set up.
be funny too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I love Jiu-Jitsu, but yeah, the sort of unintentional comedy or direct or intentional comedy with like his Cat Diaries too.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, he finds that like one premise and
Mm-hmm.
hits it as hard as possible, and then he's out,
Yeah.
and it's so good. He is so
Yeah.
terrifying.
You only needed 16 pages to tell it to. It only takes like a couple of minutes to read. That's why, did you see that Netflix anime adaptation of Junji Ito's stuff?
I I have not. I think there have been a couple of adaptations. I don't understand how they could make it good without spending too much money on it. Like
Yeah.
carrying across what makes his. I think Super Eye Patch Wolf might have done, or somebody did a video on like why it's so difficult to adapt his art.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of it because I was like, I could just read comics.
Yeah.
If I
You
had
can just
heard it
read.
was really good, I would have checked it out. Or I haven't seen any. There's like a live action Uzumaki. I haven't seen that
There is a
either.
live action news. It's okay. It's the same as, any other live action anime movie. If you've seen the live action Attack on Titan or the live action Death Note, not the US ones, the Japanese ones, which are actually somewhat get the vibe. Uh, which is, not to get on a tangent here, but I'm not looking forward to the Netflix One Piece. I saw the trailer and it's like, it's such a shame because it's like perfectly cast. Like you did as good of a job as you could possibly do casting it, and it does not. Something about the look of it, the really digital, smooth quality of it
It's
is like,
clean.
yeah, the clean,
I
polished quality of it. It's a big turnoff for me.
the dialogue is what got me.
Yeah,
Where
the
Luffy's like, I'm
MCU
sensing
like
some
dialogue.
tension amongst the crew. I'm like, no. That it could look way too clean and have all these other issues but if it had the personalities right, I would still
Yeah.
probably be into it. But I'm like, please don't write this like a Whedon thing.
Yes, Luffy doesn't sense tension. He's an idiot.
Yeah, he's a
He doesn't
dumbass.
pick up on emotional cues.
Which is such a weird. And then I watched a ton of reaction videos to it, and I was reading a lot about it because I wanted to get a barometer for the Western. And a lot of people are like, well, you just couldn't keep that. It was either that's Japanese, like a Japanese mindset, and you have to change it for a world audience, or it's live action, so he can't be silly. I'm like, both of those things are really stupid to say.
Yeah, one, because One Piece is the most popular manga in the world. You don't have to change it for, you go to Italy, you go to Mexico, there's Luffy gear. You go to Saudi Arabia, there's Luffy stuff there. It translates perfectly fine to an international audience.
You don't have to make it. I just can't. I hate that. The recently on Twitter too going around, it was the Workaholics, like all the banned lines from it. Have you seen that on the whiteboard? Like, so that happened, and like all the cringy, weedney, smarmy. It was like a big list. I'm like, whenever the show comes out, I'm gonna get that list and mark off how many they use. I just hate that, especially because like I really love like good dialogue, good characterization, and like Oda has the characters so down. It's like Luffy doesn't have thought bubbles ever because he's stupid. You never see his internal. That's part of that's such a big part of the character. Yeah, that was my big gripe with it. And I also like and speaking of One Piece, there's so much like body horror and body mutilation, self mutilation.
Yeah, lots of that
body
in there.
Changing. I have like been meaning for years to write a video essay on that. Or like there's a scene that should be in the first season where someone is like stabbing herself in the arm. I'm like, are they gonna do it? We'll find out.
Yeah, the body horror of One Piece that's a very good essay to write on. But also it contains that two things. The one, you can see how it leads to people's decay, but two, it also that empowerment thing as well.
Yeah.
Ascend past yourself by altering yourself in some way.
Or eat it. You have to eat your own leg to live, or like turn into a monster. There's so much. It's like a very like mutilating your body or sacrificing your body for your like ideology or survival is like a core element of it that I think is absent from a lot of other children's media.
People get scarred a lot,
Yeah.
Zoro, like Odin, sacrifices an eye at one point for more. There's
a lot of Zoro, like he tries to cut his own limbs off sometimes, and people are like, "Stop it!"
Or it's just in Baratie, an extraordinary piece of violence with Mihawk just gutting him there. I get why 4Kids censored that.
Some of it is like, I get it.
Yeah, don't agree with everything they did, but I understand why they were like, oh yeah, the one where he gets gutted. No.
Yeah, and the first chapter of the manga is Luffy stabs himself in the face as like a 10-year-old, and they cut that from the anime. Even the anime, they were like, we don't need this liability. But that's like one of the first pages. He's like, I'm strong, and he just stabs. There's like,
One Piece rules. Okay, that's I if I want to talk about One Piece, I'll have you on again because I can. Also you're on a One Piece podcast as well.
Yeah, we do a really cool miniseries called Fight Together that's about more like serious adult topics. Like we've talked about like colonialism, like racism, trans representation, and we always do our best to get on guests who are like familiar with this stuff and have studied it and can talk at length about it. And it's really fun to do. I mean, the whole podcast is really good too, but if you want a more like serious miniseries, I'm one of the hosts on Fight Together.
Hell yeah. Fun. I love the queer politics in One Piece because at once you'll have the most horrifyingly stereotypical representations of gay people or queer people, and then on the other hand, you'll have some of the best written queer people in all of literature, maybe,
For real. And
Yeah.
especially considering if Oda is a straight guy, the best written by someone who's not like he when he was a lot younger, he lived in like an area that had cheaper rent but had a lot of gay people in it. So like Whitebeard was based on a gay bartender he knew. And it's not overt in the show, but like Whitebeard never sleeps with women. And then there is just and I watch a lot of reaction videos, and like I said, I'm interested in like how people react to stuff, and like Bon Clay, a lot of the more emotional stuff with him. You'll watch these videos of men who've probably said the most transphobic stuff in the world, like weeping reacting to this like really flamboyant character. It's really cool. It's really awesome.
Yeah.
And there's some bad stuff too, but it's
it sort of gets offset. And what do you different? I'll use it's a different culture. It doesn't translate. I'll use that excuse for that. Because I want to say that it's all good. Well, it's not all good. We all know Thriller Bark. Nah, Thriller Bark is all right. I like Thriller
I hate
Bark.
Fishman Island.
Nobody likes
body horror
Fishman Island.
podcast. I don't need to derail it.
Yeah, we get off on the One Piece tangent. Body horror. I also think about the reason why it gets to me, like the reason why I really love exploring body horror, the reason why it affects me more than other horror, is from that knowledge that are sort of, there's a lot of different, philosophical theories of it, but fundamentally our universe is dictated by our body, the way that we interact with other people, the way that people see us, the way that we breathe, the way that we take in information is just all contained within our meat. So, it's funny how, like, I guess one of the earliest examples of body horror I can think of too is probably H.P. Lovecraft, or you could even say Frankenstein is basically a body horror piece as well. But yeah, I think all of these examples come together. Like, we are essentially, our universe, our perception is dictated by these just easily changeable and fragile faculties, and meditating on that fragility produces that like spicy food sensation, produces that sort of like, I'm teetering on the edge of abyss here when I think about, just how easily this, and thus me and my entire universe, my sense of permanence, my sense of ego could change. Does that affect you in that way?
I think so too, in your relationships with other people, like in The Fly, or stuff like just thinking about parasites. Remember when I was younger, I watched a ton of Animal Planet and Discovery, and learning about what the bowflies or botflies, I get them mixed up.
Botflies,
where they like that for just about anybody. I think that is really disturbing. It's a violation of like the sanctity of your body, or tapeworms, or like again, growing up in Georgia, I'd get ticks when I was a kid, and that's horrifying. A thing buried its head in my skin.
Yeah, that was the worst shroom trip I ever had. Yeah.
Oh, it's just like it is, and like it's sort of, you could see it as an extension of fear of death, or fear of getting old, or people being terrified of being like disabled or disfigured, because of how society would then treat you as a result, or just like like gangrene and like rotting and stuff. I was reading with the and again, not to derail, but reading about the submarine thing that's happening right now.
Which this is coming out on Sunday, so there's a chance it's not gonna.
Well, we don't know now.
We don't know
they're
now.
Fine.
Yeah, they're fine, I'm sure.
Explosive depressurization.
Oh no,
I've never read about that before. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah.
I had there's a video, I could find it and link it later too. That's it's an instructional video for divers. But my friends and I, my like IRL friends and I, got fascinated with it. It's like delta something pressure, just about how you could just get that sort of thing. There's like a part of the video, and it's kind of sad, where there's like a pipe with a little crack in it, and a crab walks over it and just gets like sucked in and instantly killed. And that kind of stuff is terrifying and interesting, and also unlikely to ever happen to me.
Yeah.
So it is a little less scary than a lot of body horror stuff, but just like that kind of like instant, like you're just missed.
Yeah.
It's not even that you slowly rot, or like, it's a slow decomposition. It's like what could happen to you, and then you're just gone.
Yeah. That is scary, but that is way less scary to be like actually becoming mist is almost sort of nice when you think about it. It's like I think in the Marvel movies, that's instead of turning into goo or melting, they just turned into dust, because
That's
it's
not that
somehow
scary. It's
it's
sad.
less intense. Yeah, it's sad and it reminds us of mortality. But that sort of I think the real horror of the submarine is the waiting, is the
Yeah.
knowing that it's going to if it wasn't expressive, if it wasn't an implosion, I think that's also sort of the horror of body horror as well. It's that it's taking a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's slowly happening too, and you have to like you have all this time to come to grips with your fate as well, and sort of like have these last moments of clarity before you finally take the plunge, like the
Mm-hmm.
excellent insects don't have any government speech in The Fly, where he's just using these final moments of lucidity to articulate his complete understanding of what lies in wait for him,
Mm-hmm.
which is, that's a fucking, that's a thing to think about.
That's heavy.
Yeah. And
Um,
everyone was making fun of the submarine guys because well, it's an act of hubris. If you
mm-hmm.
do a hubristic act and you fail, it's like those guys on Mount Everest.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. What do you what do you want? What do you want? It's kind of funny.
I think it is. There have been some very funny jokes about it. I think
Mm-hmm.
there is like a lot of people online, and this might be like a hot take, a lot of people online are just waiting for an excuse to have kind of like unhinged bloodlust
Yeah.
and just be like so happy someone is like dying terribly. And they're just kind of
Like,
like waiting for it to align correctly. I think a lot of the jokes are funny. And I'm
yeah.
not, us saying something on a podcast has no impact on these rich people and their scared families. But there is like a weird sort of animalistic, like, okay, they're cool. Okay,
Yeah.
this is, it's weird.
Which I get for like Kissinger or like people who
Yeah,
like
yeah.
do demonstratively bad
If
stuff. But
something happened to
oh,
Jeff
this guy I
Bezos,
just heard about yesterday, he's a billionaire. He should die. I want
yeah,
him
it's
dead, which is,
weird.
a joke about it. Also, I want to say joke about it. I don't care. You're not a bad person if you joke about it. But yeah, sometimes we all have those moments of weakness, those moments
Hmm.
of, werewolf. We all want to turn into werewolves, right? But
Yeah.
it sort of behooves you to try and keep it down a little. Try that's one emotion that's good to suppress. I'm
Or
not
to
all
choose
about
the right
suppression.
targets
Yeah.
for the actual. And again, it's like, oh, these poor rich people. But then it becomes like, oh, there's like a internet famous socialist who has a little bit more money than everybody else, and everyone was like, well, that person's the next person we're killing. It's like, hold on, calm down. That's again, this might be a hot take, but it's like I get it. But yeah, keep it. I don't know. Keep some perspective. There were some. I don't think I retweeted a lot of them,
Yeah.
but I did like them,
Yeah,
and I
sure.
thought they were funny. Or like
Yeah.
a lot of the controller jokes. Or there was one about the
Yeah.
the geocacher guy.
Yeah.
Only one man can find. I thought that one was funny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah.
But that's a bit more positive. That joke
Mhm.
ends with them getting saved. It
Yeah,
doesn't
and
end
this
with them.
hypothetical thing. There were people who were like, again, this is stop dating the podcast, but the
Yeah,
orcas flipping over
yeah, of
boats.
course.
There was
Yeah,
like a piece in the Atlantic or something that was like, you shouldn't be cheering on the orcas. And I'm like, they can't hear me. What? This is all about like us. It
yeah,
has nothing to do with the actual, no effect like whatsoever on the actual situation. And you're admonishing people for it. It's
yeah.
just interesting. Yeah,
I
that kind of, yeah, the back and forth of like the id versus the superego or whatever in people.
yeah, yeah. You should be a better person than this. But come on, it's so funny.
I think
Come
it'd be pretty
on.
funny. Yeah.
Well, it's that classic thing. It's that classic Mel Brooks quote where he says, "Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when someone falls into an open sewer and dies." Right?
Yeah.
It's the extremity of it. It's the the severity of it. It's something you don't expect to happen. And
I
that
think that'd be pretty
surprise, that
funny.
punch. It's
Hmm.
what creates the horror. It's what creates the comedy. It's all intertwined.
And luckily in movies, the people aren't real. So if they
Yeah,
die in a hilarious way, it's okay to laugh.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
bad. Yeah. It's not, yeah, movies aren't real. And you can explore that. Like you're talking about the Justin Long character in
Hmm.
Barbarian. It's like you kind of want to see something bad happen to him. You
Yeah,
feel for him in this situation, but it's like, okay, let's see what's this little dude, this horrible, horrible man. What's gonna happen to him?
yeah, yeah. You feel a sort of I like when I remember being in Get Out when Daniel Kaluuya is finally getting free and he's stabbing Bradley Whitford and Caleb Landry Jones and Catherine Keener and everyone's like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, bloodshed, yeah, it's cool.
I love in Scream, when one of the two, like, spoilers for Scream, the two kids who actually did it is like he's been stabbed and he's like dying, but then he's like, my mom's gonna be so mad at me. It's so funny. Like the
Yeah,
way the patheticness of the character, and though even though I'm watching like a mentally ill teenager die in the space of the fiction, is really funny. It's
yeah,
really
yeah.
good.
It's a human moment where even though these like ridiculous things are happening, it sort of grounds you in a little bit of reality, which
Mm-hmm.
I like that when that happens in these otherwise ridiculous movies too, and there's like a small line of dialogue that to really humanize the characters.
I love Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's
It's one of my favorite Canadian horror
great,
films.
great Canadian movie.
The rare sighting of Canadian rednecks in a movie.
Yeah,
Um,
that we have them. That's our entire media landscape is Canadian rednecks. I've said this before, but 95% of Canadian media is people having mundane problems in rural communities.
mhm.
Letterkenny, Trailer
That's
Park
true. That's
Boys,
true.
Corner Gas, The Red Green Show. You know, that's that. But it doesn't come up a lot in horror, actually. It's funny that,
Mhm.
like, the big representation for Canada's urban settings, i.e., Toronto, and why I think Toronto is actually uniquely and perfectly suited for a body horror movie, a perfect setting, because it sort of reminded me of the experience of going to a hospital just like walking through the city of Toronto. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
ever been to Toronto, but
I would like to. I have not.
it's a great city. I rep it. I love it a lot. But there is a sterile quality to it. I've heard it.
Mm.
It's like New York if it were designed by the Swiss. Somebody has once said,
Mhm.
but it is that sterile quality. You know, all right angles and sort of this imposed order that gives it that otherworldly quality. And like a hospital, it's like all of this antiseptic stuff that's done to mask the
Mm.
beating heart of meat that is inside of it. You know, that juxtaposition between this really boxy, indistinct gray exterior, but this like thumping red, you know, vein filled interior, which is, you know, why I think Cronenberg, whether he intended to or not, sort of drew upon that quality of Toronto.
That's really interesting. I don't know enough about Toronto. I'd never heard of it conceptualized that way, and that makes a lot of sense. And it's coming from the U.S., like the South, and having been to New York a bunch. It's not sterile at all. So
Yeah,
there's not
yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah.
It's not. Yeah, the South is very like open, like an open wound, all in the swamps and stuff, like all
Yes,
the time,
yeah,
like True Detective type stuff. So that, yeah,
yeah.
that's really interesting.
There's a lot of body horror in True Detective. Actually, yeah, one of the
Yeah.
pieces that really addresses the chemical effect on our reality. That's like a huge theme throughout the first season of True Detective is like, I worked in an industrial laundry for 40 years and the tips of my fingers are burned off. You know, there's a real body horror elements to that as well. And also, you know, the main guy, he's sort of weird. No, I mean the Glenn Fleshler character, the killer in the end.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Spoilers for True Detective. There's a killer.
Horrifying.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's bad things happen in True Detective, and it's spooky.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I need to, especially coming. I come from like a really Southern family. That's like my cultural heritage more than anything
Mm-hmm.
else. Like I need to get into more so like more Southern Gothic horror because what I've seen of it, I like it's awesome, and it's so
Yeah,
fitting for because there's so the South is so beautiful and so cool, but has such a horrific, uniquely horrific history, and it's
yeah.
hot and there's mosquitoes and there's like weird stuff too. So it's just like all kind of comes together, or even like Texas Chainsaw Massacre too.
Oh yeah.
That
I
kind
mean,
of
that
stuff,
was in
that
the
vibe.
70s. Hillbilly horror is like you
Hmm.
got The Hills Have Eyes and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Why were we so afraid of hillbillies in the 70s?
I don't know why the
Deliverance?
70s. It is like I think a classism thing
Yeah.
more than anything else, but I don't know why. Maybe it's out of vogue now, and Tucker and Dale plays with that.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Obviously,
true.
the like fear of I would say now it's more people just like think of Southerners as stupid or uneducated or inherently bigoted when they're not, versus being like afraid. You
Yeah.
know, I think that's different now. Maybe more people have interacted. I don't know why that changed because I can't think of a recent like hillbilly horror type movie.
Red State by Kevin Smith is like the last one I could sort of that was
Mm-hmm. I have
not
not
so
seen that one.
successful.
Yeah.
It's not so good. It's all right, What do you want? I like Kevin Smith. I root for him. I don't know why. Because he
He
makes
seems
me
like a
think,
nice dude.
yeah.
I saw him. He did this like speech about Kevin Conroy. That's really touching. After Kevin Conroy died, like he
Yeah.
seems like he's goofy. The Home episode of the X Files. I also watched the X Files growing up. Home
Mm-hmm.
is where there's like the inbred Southern people who have the baby
Yeah.
that they bury and like all that weird. That's probably the most recent like
Mm-hmm.
hillbilly horror thing I can think of.
Yeah, it's really because now there's sort of more awareness that it's like the proletarian against the oppressors. I think sort of the ushering in of socially conscious horror movies have sort of or the popularity of them now have eschewed away that fear of the underclass. That's
Yeah.
not a thing anymore. Or even I
Mhm.
guess fear of the underclass is also expressed in zombie movies too, where it's like a fear
Mm.
of the masses and those have gone out of vogue as well.
They went fast
Yeah.
first. They changed it around a lot. Or yeah, there's been more like weird meta takes on it. Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, now a lot of it is just more it's like there's somebody in your house or some kind of vague supernatural thing.
Yeah.
That would be so interesting to pay more attention and do more of a survey on modern horror and
Mm-hmm.
where all that's going. But some of it, I love horror is my favorite genre by far, but so much of it, like when horror is like bad, it can be so boring.
Yeah. Well, because you just don't feel, especially if like you don't care about the characters. If
Mm-hmm.
that has not been established, why you should care about the characters, you always need like a little moment where they do something a little cute or relatable,
Yeah,
or they have something which distinguishes them as people, so that you can feel that this is an idiosyncratic personality that resembles something. And I feel like I'm trying to think of like the last horror movie that I saw that was like a lambs to the slaughter type thing that didn't really work. And it's hard to. I guess I usually avoid those movies
mm-hmm.
too, like because I was trying to think of something like You're Next, but no, they give the personality of the main girl is that she's Australian, and that's enough. That's
It's enough.
enough to
That
carry.
definitely has
Yeah,
enough for you to, or like It Follows or something. Like you
yeah.
don't need their whole biography. I really like I haven't seen the new ones, but I love the Benson Moorhead films, like Resolution.
I don't know those ones. Which ones
Oh
are
my God, Resolution is like it's sort of like a Cabin in the Woods or Tucker and Dale meta horror. It's like
they?
this
Mm-hmm.
guy's on drugs and he's like really messed up and his friend chains him to the wall in this house to try to like save him as like an intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a lot of weird meta stuff. It's really scary and about sort of like audience complicitness in horror. And
Mm-hmm.
then they did a couple more movies. They did Spring and then what was the third one? Hold on. Uh but it was my old roommate years ago. We were just going through Netflix and clicked on Resolution and it ended up being like one of my favorite
Mm-hmm.
horror movies I've ever seen. The Endless is really good too. That was
Mm-hmm.
like Resolution, Spring, The Endless are kind of not like a trilogy, but then they've done a couple movies after that. I would have just like again, it's not like self-serious elevated horror, but God, it's so good. It's like very just sort of meta American
Mm-hmm.
horror.
But
And the
not
end
like because I like Cabin in the Woods, but you
it's so
watch
much better.
and it really dates a lot. Talk about Whedon dialogue. I mean, it was written by him, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are aspects of that movie I still like a lot. But and I see you're into like what body horror video games are you into? Resident Evil's obviously like the big one, but one that have you ever heard of the Shadow Hearts series?
I have heard of it. I haven't played them.
Yeah, it's a mildly obscure PlayStation 2 JRPG series. But I played the death out of those things, and I'm sure a huge reason of why I'm into body horror is because I had so
Mm.
much experience with those games, which were very Lovecraft influenced, very like people turning into weird mythological tentacle monsters sort of thing.
I'm a big Silent Hill person.
Yes.
Silent Hill 2 especially, which is sort of like people's repressed pain and desire, similar to Sweet Home and other stuff. Like their repressed emotional stuff kept bursting forth as like horror. It's
Yeah.
so and like even when I was a lot younger, I had such a problem with the way that Pyramid Head became like a mascot character because he is like James's repressed like the horrible side of the protagonist. It's like
Yeah.
I don't know. That's what he is. He's very
Yeah,
tied to that, but he was
he's
popular, so
yeah, the living embodiment of rape
yeah, is what he is.
yeah.
Because like James, his wife was dying, and he was sexually frustrated, and like had all like had guilt, but then had like these horrible like impulses and urges in the way he looked at women. And it's like it's not just like the mascot rape character that we think is fun because
Yeah.
and it has such a densely layered, important, like relevant meaning in this like somehow like 2001 horror game. It's like one of my favorite pieces of horror movie ever. But now it's like he's like a theme park mascot, which is weird.
The design was too cool. Unfortunately, the design was cool such that you can do. Yeah, this is like if you actually read about what Pyramid Head is about, is the worst person ever. But Lord knows he's got a great hat. I love that hat.
Oh, I saw that movie. I was so mad. I hated that movie. So much. Whenever I was probably like a teenager.
Yeah.
Just being like, oh, this is not what the reason that I love this game so much, the reason that it resonated so much is this is just like a gore fest, which I like a gore fest. I like a dumb gore fest of people getting ripped in half, but like you're just making it. And it also makes, the rapey element of it. It cheapens it so much, and it's like, oh, now it's just like sick exploitation, and it's not. There's no reason for it anymore.
There's no thinky pain to it. There's just that sort of visceral pain to it. There's no like you don't go back to it later and think about.
Oh, this is why the nurses are like this, because of this. It's like it just becomes like a weird horny thing. I should mention too, NBC's Hannibal. I was a huge Hannibal fan too. Like a lot of really weird, grotesque.
Yeah, I'm a big I love Hannibal as well. Brian Fuller has hit and miss, but that one definite hit. I love the guy. He turns people into cellos. Mason Verger gets all fucked up, and then it changes actors for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know why. Probably none of my business. Probably there's like a reason. The Eddie Izzard character, isn't he like got snails on his arm before Hannibal eats him, where he's like his arm's cut off or something? There's snails with him. I don't know. And I love. I'm a huge Raul Esparza fan who played Chilton.
Yeah, and he keeps getting just progressively more fucked up, which I love. Like Rickety Cricket. Every season he loses another part of him.
There's so good, and it's also similar to the One Piece thing of like your body is your like what you use to navigate the world, but you can keep surviving even as it gets like horrifically fucked up.
Yeah,
when there's like all these pieces of him missing, and he still has his personality. I love that character.
Well, he becomes a better person as pieces of him go missing. His character develops, and he becomes wiser and smarter, which is I like that theme as well.
It's so good.
I think what you mentioned, like stuff in Sweet Home or stuff where it's somebody's inner personality manifesting as how like life, that is because that's what it feels if you've ever had like a mental health episode. It feels like you're turning into a fucking monster or something like that, and you're turning people away, and you look at yourself in a mirror and you don't recognize yourself. Even though, you're probably still the same, your inner state has morphed your body into something that you perceive as terrible.
So when that's handled well, I love it.
Yeah.
I love, like I said, it's not horror, but the Persona games too, Persona 4 specifically. It's like the dungeons are based on the like repressed fears of the people who are going to be your friend. So you're like, what is this? What does this mean for this guy? Yeah. In Sweet Home, it is so grotesque, and it's really violent. Like these monsters smash people to death and like eat people. And there's one, I think that's like a peeping Tom in real life, and he becomes like a creepy eyeball monster.
Hell yeah.
And there's like a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah, I like that too, because it's also, I guess if you're going back to the original body horror, it's got to be like the Bible, right? Or it's got to be like myths or something. Because, you get into tons of Greek myths where somebody is transformed into a spider for their hubris, or somebody turns into a pillar of salt, or and I guess that stuff always interested me as well, because even like, and maybe there's something very Old Testament. I'm also Jewish, so I think there's like that inherent comedy too of like you Old Testament God style punishment where you do something relatively minor, and then there's this huge outsized punishment that is that befalls you because you stepped over the line wrong. Oh no, now you're a lizard.
Or even like Job didn't even do anything, right? They were just like, let's mess with this guy.
Yeah. But people misinterpret Job as a comedy. That's what people don't understand, is Job is a joke, I did everything right, and you still continue to lose. Isn't that funny?
And there's also... Or go ahead, sorry.
No, I think that's just ultimately why the submarine thing is, because it's that like
Yeah.
Old Testament thing is like we tried to spit in the face of God, and then God is like, no, this is the worst thing that's gonna happen to you for doing something that's only like a little hubristic, something that's not even, tons of people have visited the Titanic in private
Mm-hmm.
ships before. Mike Reese, the Simpsons writer, did last year. But for their small act of hubris, an outsized, terrible Old Testament style punishment has befallen them. And that is the source of all Jewish comedy. That is the
Mm-hmm.
source of, comedy is when someone falls into an open sewer and dies. It's that Old Testament style joke.
Or when they get instantly pressurized or whatever. Like
Yeah,
when yeah, don't even
yeah.
want to think about.
But
Um
you think about that little moment, that scream moment, or my mom's going to be so mad. Oh, what if I press this button? And then they go, oh, and they have
yeah.
that little humanizing moment before they are obliterated.
That was one of the ones I was reading about. It was a Norwegian like oil rig thing, and something went wrong. They blamed this one guy for it, but it was probably a mechanical failure. Like they sued years and years later. But it
Mm-hmm.
was like there were these different compartments that were supposed to be slowly depressurized, and for some reason something went wrong mechanically, or a guy turned a wheel he wasn't supposed to, and like five people died, and one of them, the wheel, there was like kind of a crescent gap
Mm-hmm.
between the two different, and he like got sucked, his whole body like got slurped through instantly. I was reading about that last night too. It's like that kind of, and again, I don't know if it
Like
was just a,
Goldfinger in that in Goldfinger.
what happened. I haven't seen that one all the
Goldfinger
way.
gets sucked out of a plane, and at first he gets
Ah,
stuck, and then he's going, bah, bah, and then he gets
that's
fully
like
sucked
the
out of the
through
plane.
that small.
Yeah.
That's gonna haunt me forever. I was gonna say too, like there is a fascination among like I don't know, like online horror people, Tumblr type people now with the biblically accurate angel, like
Yes.
with all the
Yeah.
eyes and
That's a
stuff. That because
trope.
it is
Yeah.
horrifying. That wasn't something I was that exposed to when I was younger, but now it's like I think I have some stickers or enamel pins with that
Mm-hmm.
because it's cool and it's like Mothman or whatever.
Yeah.
But like objectively, it's horrifying. It's like a be not
Yeah.
afraid thing. It's like it's sort of almost represented as something that's trying to scare you into submission. You
Mm-hmm.
know, inherently terrifying.
Something that you can't comprehend and thus
Mm-hmm.
are inherently submissive to,
Yeah.
just like a Lovecraftian entity.
Mm-hmm. Just with a
Uh,
different point of view of the author on how you should respond.
um, yeah. Back to horror. What did you have any like foundational horror video games, or was it mostly movies and TV?
A lot of it was Silent Hill too. I've also played a ton. This is like less foundational,
Mm-hmm.
but I got really into the PS1 horror like movement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is where a bunch of like independent horror game creators are making these like really, really short free games. And the style
Mm-hmm.
of like late 90s, early 2000s, like
Like
N64 and
blocky, low
PlayStation.
poly, like
Mm-hmm.
low, shitty textures.
Yeah, but
I
they're
shouldn't say
still
shitty. They're fun. They're good.
they're
I
dated.
love that style. Yeah.
It's like we I was thinking about it because like in the scan line I did with H bomb, the VHS one, we're talking about how like that is a particular aesthetic that lends itself well to horror, and I hadn't considered how much like not being super high def, being a little murkier, being a little weirder makes something can make
Mm-hmm.
something a lot scarier, and they explore that a lot. And last year I was playing Majora's Mask for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
and that game is terrifying,
It is a scary,
and
scary game.
that influenced them a lot too. I think Deadly Premonition is another horror game that I loved. That is more weird comedy horror,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. But I think that one sort of changed my perspective on art because it's a really broken game.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but it's such a labor of love and it's so interesting. And then the second one came out more recently and it's set in Louisiana and it doesn't handle racial politics
Ah,
well at
well,
all. It's not that good. The other one is like a Twin Peaks homage, and this one's a True Detective homage.
okay.
Both made by a Japanese man who is not that keyed in on
That's all right.
American
He
culture.
doesn't have to be.
Yeah, but yeah, Deadly Premonition is one too that really left an impression. It's a fascinating, really funny, really strange game.
Mm-hmm.
That has a lot of Japanese horror elements set in like Twin Peaks.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really cool.
I like that. I really like Japanese horror.
Mm-hmm.
And the horror and the body horror of Japanese horror, which I feel is like a lot more. They have a lot more of it there for some reason. Maybe it's because of the legacy, as you were saying, atomic horror,
Mm-hmm.
where they experienced more of that stuff firsthand, and it still is prominent in their cultural idioms.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm thinking of is like I can't name anything other than Junji, because I'm a dilettante. I don't know
It's
anything.
like Akira, all
Yeah,
the stuff in that,
yeah,
and like
there you go.
Godzilla. Not really horror, but like the kind of helplessness of it. It's also sort of like how 9/11 broke Americans' brains. Not
Yeah,
that nearly
yeah,
as many people died, or to equate the two things, but like you watch like Cloverfield or whatever, like there's a lot of
yeah.
it's weird.
Well, War of the Worlds, Steven Spielberg's War of the
Mhm.
Worlds. It's 9/11. There were a lot of 9/11 horror movies.
Which
Uh,
makes sense, but
I
yeah.
was actually trying to think of like the most prominent or biggest American body horror thing to come out recently, and what I landed on was Chernobyl. Did you see Chernobyl?
I didn't see it, but that makes sense.
It was Chernobyl is okay. It is like well acted. It's a lot of anti-Soviet propaganda, which is to be expected. It's funny
Yeah.
that it's Craig Mazin, who, if you know his career as a screenwriter, did like all of the movies, like Epic Movie and Date Movie.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was also roommates with Ted Cruz in college and gained some sort of Twitter fame by talking about how weird of a roommate Ted Cruz was. But then Craig Mazin he makes this Chernobyl thing, which is it's competent. If it's really well cast. Jared Harris and Stellan Skarsgård are really good in it. But yeah, it's definitely flawed. But what I will say, the radiation sickness makeup, it hit
Hmm.
me in that body horror. It hit me in that way. It's some of like the best, like, oh, that guy's really fucked up. Like makeup I've seen in like a mainstream thing for a while. Even in like Last of Us, which has like the body horror elements of the shroom things, because
Mm.
that's a bit more fantastical. It's it's less relatable and less visceral than like seeing these people die of radiation poisoning and
I'm
just seeing
che-
their skin slough off, stuff like that. They did a really good job at portraying the horror of that.
Is it more practical stuff?
Yes, it's
Again, I
all
haven't seen
practical
it.
stuff. Yeah, zero CGI used. They simulated radiation poisoning uh with that. I guess the other one that I can think of, which I guess the guy who Alex Garland isn't American, but Annihilation was a
Mm.
recent body horror that I loved a lot. Talk about how like I think I was talking to a friend the other day, and he said all body horror or is sort of reducible down to cancer, or it's sort of reducible down to this thing that won't stop growing that's taking you over.
Or like gangrene.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's like there's the two types. There's the rot, there's less of you, or there's the cancer, there's more of you.
Hmm.
And each of them are horrifying for different reasons. But yeah, Annihilation, a cancer across the land, and it's affecting everything. There's something really powerful to that.
I'm cheating looking at the list of body horror media
Of course.
Wikipedia page. Annihilation's on there. I
Yeah.
will not. I cannot handle this show. I think it's kind of the vibes are really bad. But Made in Abyss, the anime
I don't
is
know
on
what that
here.
is. What is that?
It's super popular, and a
Okay.
lot of people I respect really like it. It's like these kids are going, there's like a big hole in the ground in the
Mm-hmm.
jungle or something, and they keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And as they go in, it like deforms their bodies more, and it's like super graphic, disturbing body horror. But they're
Okay.
all really prepubescent and it's kind of sexual. They're like
Okay.
6 year old. They look, it's weird. Like I can't watch
Okay.
it. Again, I haven't seen it. I can't like if someone who likes it is listening, I'm not saying people who like it are perverts, but it's like a lot of like transformation, mutation. I think if they were like a little bit older, I could watch it, but there is definitely the vibe is bad. But it's really,
Okay.
really popular. It's like a for how disturbing it is.
Yeah.
It's really popular now. I don't know why they have Deadpool on the list. That's interesting.
That is interesting. I guess technically, yeah, he is cancer as well. He's got he's he had the little baby legs in that one movie. That was
Yeah,
pretty
little
weird.
tiny hand.
Yeah.
District 9 was really good.
Oh yeah, yeah. District 9 is pretty good, but I feel like the body horror is secondary in that
Mm-hmm.
movie. Like you don't actually see his like face get fucked up. You see his arm get fucked up, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
see his face get fucked up, which is you got to see their face get fucked up in order for it to really resonate with you. Um, but yeah, like if those are the examples that you're pulling from, those are like from a long time ago. There is just like not a mainstream body horror thing in horror movies right now.
They have like Nope and Old, and like no,
Kinda, I
Nope is
guess
not body
old,
horror to
yeah.
me. People get spoilers, people get eaten, but it's not really.
Yeah, old was I liked old. Yeah, I'm a Shyamalan apologist. I
I
don't
should
need to
watch it before.
apologize. He's great.
He's really interesting.
Yeah,
He's a super interesting guy. But yeah, there's not like Crimes of the Future.
yeah, Cronenberg, uh, back in his form. He's
Color Out of
done.
Space too, which I liked.
Yeah,
Uh,
but you don't see much fucked up stuff happen to them either in the movie.
no.
There's no like money shot like in I'd say money. What a gross term.
For what we're talking about.
Disgusting. But you know, like the punchline, like when Jeff Goldblum's jaw rips up at the fly, and then you know, oh, now it's really happening, and then the music starts going, the dun 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 dun. You know, there's it doesn't have one of those moments where they have finally succumbed to the thing that is eating them.
No.
You know, which is why it didn't get me in that like, ooh, this is fucking me up sort of way. But Chernobyl actually did that.
I should watch Chernobyl. My family watched it and really liked it.
Yeah, it is okay. You get to ignore some of the more like obviously anti-Soviet stuff, but other than that, it's fine. It's fine. I should ask you about your zine, your tabletop RPG. What are you exploring in your zine? Is it a lot of short stories, or is there a longer narrative that you're doing?
It's the only thing tying everything together is that it's all body horror. I just sort of did a Kickstarter in February 2020, which was a horrible mistake. I had no idea, you know. It took like 3 years to come out because of that, just for a lot of different reasons, like right before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's called Inside Out. I have like print copies and digital copies available. But I got just like I knew a bunch of tabletop designers and people who did like horror actual play podcasts. I know a bunch of horror artists. So I was just like, what do you want to do for this? Essentially, I gave people free reign. Like I got Stephen Dewey, who did this game called 10 Candles, which is like probably my favorite horror tabletop game. I was so happy to get Stephen on. Where 10 Candles is where it's not in my zine, but they wrote this separately where you like light a bunch of candles, and then as your characters are slowly dying, you like snuff them out as you're playing, and you burn your character cards like physically.
Oh, that's cool.
Life. And you are physically, if they go out, they go out. You can't relight them. So if you're laughing or you move your hands and you snuff it out, then like so you're physically still.
Oh, that's a great mechanic. That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. So Steven wrote this module called the Shy Lamp Worker for my zine, and I got art from Trevor Henderson for that one, and like Nick.
Hell yeah, Siren Head.
Yeah, Trevor's awesome. Trevor's like the nicest dude.
Yeah, he rules. Got great taste in art. Got great taste in movies. Nothing but good things to say about Trevor Henderson.
I got like him, Nick Tofani, Tess Stone, who I've been a fan of for a long time. Cosmic, the artist for Feast for a King, which I was talking about. I got Zalabri Nelson Jr. is one of the writers. I got Etten, who's like a great tabletop writer too. And there's like sci-fi stuff. There's Zalabri wrote like a short horror story about like a creature that you can incorporate into games. It was mostly just me being like, hey, I like body horror. Do you like it? Do you want money to do something for this thing?
Yeah.
I'm really proud of it. It's not like a cohesive story. It's a bunch of different modules people could run in their own tabletop games with like really a lot of like flavor, art, and like maps and stuff like that. So it was very stressful because I was not prepared for all the work over COVID when like everything got derailed, and Kickstarter backers, I will say, are very demanding in a way that I was not prepared for either. I'm not going to name this person obviously, but I was being really late on it because like one of our contributors, like this person's parents got COVID and it was bad, so we kept getting delayed. Then my mom got in a horrible car accident.
Oh no.
Yeah. And I was like taking care of her, and I told this person privately about it when they reached out, and then they were like posting on the Kickstarter page. Well, Shannon hasn't said this, but I'm like, this is about my mom. You gave me $5 for a zine. I get it that you're mad, but like I'm not scamming you. I've posted everything, you know. So
yeah. I think
that whole culture is really intense.
the Kickstarter culture.
Yeah. Is
Is
not
there
my
a
favorite.
Kickstarter? I guess there is a whole vibe to even like the type of person that donates to a lot of Kickstarters because, I'm doing something good. I'm supporting people. This is charity and I am owed something because of it.
I
But
mean, I did owe them. I was terrible about updating just because I was
yeah.
overwhelmed and people were dying. And my mom like got her spine got like cracked or like got messed up. Her ribs were
Mm-hmm.
cracked, and I was like, I don't care about the zine right now. But there is like a weird because I made my money off Patreon for a long time, and the people who come to your Patreon to support you are
Mm-hmm.
totally different from people who like I like tabletop. I'm gonna give
Mm-hmm.
your Kickstarter. Where's my thing? Where's my
Mm-hmm.
thing? Are you scamming me? Are you
Yeah.
lying? Are you scamming me? It's like no. I was like, if I got like $5,000 off of it, and I went way over budget. Like I didn't
Mm-hmm.
keep any of that money, because I paid people to help me get it finished. Um, who did a wonderful job. But yeah, it was a weird experience. I'm so happy it was made, and I want to do another one, but I think I'm just gonna self fund it.
I really now this is my pitch for like a body horror movie where you
Mhm.
start a Kickstarter, but then you slowly start mutating into like a big, and you have to keep saying, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
look, and yeah, you're tempted to post a photo of yourself, but you become
the
this
YouTube
skin
apology
monster or something.
video
Yeah.
crying. I get why people were mad because I took it was like 3 years late, but there was a sense of like I'm not scamming you. I posted all the art. I paid all the people who were involved. Like, calm down. But you can't. There was a tweet that went viral recently where the Kickstarter, I don't know what it was, like a game or something, was like, you'll
Mm-hmm.
get your game when you get your game. And
Mm-hmm.
people were like, oh, that's so rude. That's so terrible. I'm like, no, it's not. You don't know what crap people say. Anyway, that's like a total tangent. But like, yeah,
Yeah,
working
no.
on this little body horror project that most people gave like $10 for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was a very weirdly stressful experience, an unpleasant experience for me because I was really late on it
Mm-hmm.
or very unhappy. But I'm really proud that it exists now.
Well,
I can send
it's
out copies
out
of it.
there. It's
Yeah.
got all the stuff you mentioned. It's got everything, and
Mhm.
people should check it out.
I'm really proud of it, and there's a lot of cool extras that come with it too. Like you can buy maps and safety. We've spent a lot of time on TTRPG safety tools, where it's like if someone like I've met a lot of people who have kids, and they're like, in the game, can we please have nothing where kids get hurt because it'll like upset me or stuff like, or like if people don't want eye stuff or bugs or whatever,
That's
you can.
interesting. You
They're
can
like
choose
really
the
good
module for eye
tools.
stuff.
Yeah,
How can you
yeah,
do
which
a body
doesn't
horror
bother
thing
me.
without any eye stuff? God
Yeah,
damn it,
I know.
the line there.
You just got to find friends who are comfortable with like the scene from Opera, the
Uh,
Giallo movie where someone has their eyes like there's a bunch of needles taped under their eyes, so if they close their eyes get poked with needles, stuff like
yeah,
that. Some people can't handle that. It's
yeah,
interesting, but obviously there's obvious stuff like sexual assault or like child stuff
yeah.
that
I
you
get.
should
Yeah,
never
that
put in
makes more
games.
sense. Yeah.
But some other people will have very specific things, and we tried to cater to that as much as possible too, because I didn't want any because I cared about people playing it, but also someone might be like, I don't like eyeball stuff, and I played your game and it upset me. It's like, well, that's on you.
Yeah.
you know.
We had the no eyeball stuff right on the warning.
Yeah, the no eyeball module options
Uh,
and whatever. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to navigate, but really rewarding. Like I said, if you ever get a chance to play 10 Candles, I mean, I love my zine too, but like 10 Candles is still
Ten
that
Candles
game
is
is
the
so
one.
cool. It's
Yeah.
so fun. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, I think we're coming about now to the end of this body horror conversation. Shannon, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your insight. You got a lot of irons in the fire out there. What are your plugs? Tell me your plugs.
You can find my YouTube channel at Strucci Movies, STRUCCI, or if you look up Fake Friends Parasocial. I haven't put a video essay up in 2 years, but I have been writing them. I hopefully will put one out in the next month or two. I am a player on the like Southern Gothic body horror Monster of the Week podcast, Oddity Roadshow. I play a gay con man named Marlon, like a cowardly, shitty little guy. I love that show. Joel, who like produces it, spends a lot of time on like music. We have a lot of original music for it and stuff. And I just did. I think it should still be going when this comes out. I cut the video for this awesome Kickstarter for a game called Triangle Agency, which is like corporate horror.
Okay.
For like X-Files Z, SCP. It reminded me of the Stanley Parable. My friend Caleb, who I've known forever, wrote this game, and the Kickstarter has been a massive success, which is so exciting. And Carly Minardo from Rude Tales of Magic did the voiceover, and I cut the video, and we spent a lot of time on it. And it's doing
yeah.
But I would highly recommend Triangle Agency too. Not as much grotesque horror, but sort of like corporate, like being trapped in a job you don't like, and there's like supernatural anomalies and monsters and stuff. So.
Yeah, Backrooms, Severance.
Yeah,
that sort
kind of stuff.
Becoming
the
more
game
of a
Control
thing now. Yeah.
was a big influence on it, which I haven't played, but I would recommend check. Even if you don't, I would recommend backing it and also watching the video I cut because I spent a lot of time on
it. Hell yeah. Well, you should do all those things. I'm telling you right now, whoever's listening, do all of them right now. Look at all the links. Go to all the links, which we'll be putting in the description of the show. Shannon, thank you so much for being on. We'll look out for what you're doing in the future, and you have a great day.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Hell yeah.